Hi, welcome to the Product Design for Learning podcast. We have got Bo with us, and Bo's topic today is data, or as it should be called, data. It's so good we named it 3 times. Bo, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're here, and why you chose data times 3?
Yes. Hi, Greg. It's nice to be here. So thank you for inviting me. I'm Bo. I'm currently impact lead at a company called Lepaya. We run design and run programs for our clients, mainly soft skill programs, and we actually strategize with them across their entire portfolio. My background is a bit varied. I studied chemical engineering, started off as an operational improvement consultant, so targeting performance in different types of companies. Worked at a scale-up, HelloFresh, here in Amsterdam, and then rolled into the world of learning. And actually, when I was a consultant, we were driving performance, but I always insisted that we do some training as part of our program. And that's where I really learned the value of bringing people along during training and how powerful that can be. And now I'm on the other side. I'm in a training company and I'm in the learning and development world and driving for the fact that performance is so important and that it's important to track performance, track data to know whether we're actually having an effect. So I've kind of come full circle and absolutely loving the L&D space.
Nice. That's a varied background and varied route to get to where you are. I imagine data probably played a part, even if it wasn't obvious at every single sort of stop that you made before you got here. But if you had to summarize data as a point in a process, so when we're talking about the product design process, it's kind of the second one in. So we've thought about the problem, we've kind of got an idea of what's making that up, still not thinking about a solution at this point, or we shouldn't be. How would you summarize the data section and also why it's important to you?
Good question. So it's, the data is the investigation, the questions that you have. It's also the critical thinking about your reason for doing what you're doing. It's joining up with stakeholders. It's making things concrete. It's gathering evidence, and it's distilling insights. Those are all the things that I think data can be, which actually from such a small word, there's a lot of concepts that I think are important at this phase. And I think it's absolutely critical. So for me, I would not start a project if I didn't have a solid basis to start from. So I think data means that, the reason why it's so important is that you will actually find out whether what you're doing, it's the basis to find out whether what you're doing is actually working, whether you're achieving your goals, and how you can share it with others. And usually that's important because you have to get funding for your projects by sharing it with others. You need to get your stakeholders on board. And that's also completely crucial for what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with that. I think it's definitely something that as an industry and as a function, we talk about data all the time. It seems to be like maybe AI has taken over at the moment as the main topic, but it seems to be data and then before that was storytelling. Seemed to be at any conference, learning conference for like maybe 3 or 4 years. Everyone's like, oh, data's the thing that we've got to go after. Prior to that was storytelling. Now it seems to be AI is the thing that everyone's going on about. So my glasses keep steaming up. So it's just super hot today, weirdly for October. But it's definitely something that whilst we talk about it a lot, I don't feel like, and I could be wrong, and I'd love to be proven wrong with data. It feels like as an L&D function, we don't do enough of it. We talk about it a lot, but we don't do it in the right way, as in data analysis, data capture, how we find out if we're going down the right path or not, even in terms of data collection. When you're working on a project, how do you even know where to begin when it comes to like that kind of data phase?
Yeah, and reflecting just on what you said, I think what I've noticed coming in from a bit of a technical background and having a lot of data, I noticed a little bit of underlying fear almost towards data. And also traditionally it was never part of the L&D function. So a little bit of like, oh, but that's not us, or, it's too difficult. So there are a few reasons, I think, why it's like this. And then to your question, where to begin, that was your question, right? So how do we get started with data if we haven't before, and if it's never been part of our function, or it's never been something we thought about, and we're like, yes, but now I'm really going to go for it. And where I begin for I cannot begin unless I have a really good bigger picture of where we're going. And this bigger picture I describe in 3 levels. There's the top level. It's the goal. Why are we doing this? And I work with organizational clients, and that's of like an organizational strategy or a department strategy or a team strategy, like a reason, a goal, the bigger picture, the bigger why of why we're doing this. That's the top level. The middle level is usually to do with the target audience. So who are the target audience? What is their situation? Why are they not achieving that goal? Because that goal is also, what's their link to that goal, and why are they maybe not achieving it? And then somehow that there also behavior change starts creeping in. Like there's usually a behavior that needs to be changed, or something a skill that they need to learn because they need to do something differently. So what is the change on an individual level that you want to achieve? So that's the middle level. And then the bottom level is the program. You've all probably thought about a program. There are learning elements involved. I also like thinking about non-traditional programs. So it doesn't always need to be a program, it can be different initiatives that you're doing. But that's what you're going to do about it. So that's that picture. And I like to have it in one slide because then it's very summarized. So just what is that? And that's where you can start. And I think from there, the data will flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so there's a couple of things in there. So we use a product canvas throughout our process, where it will change. I guess it's project to project, but it will change fairly rapidly in the beginning, whilst we're kind of saying we've only half filled in some of this because we don't know the answers. And then more towards the back end of the process, it's probably not changing that much. We should pretty much know what we're doing and why we're doing it. But in the first half, you could look at it week to week, and it could look like, and it can almost look like 2 different projects. You're like, no, same one. But then when it comes to data, and you talked about having the pardon me, the shared goal or the main goal, it's trying to make sure that is locked in your definition phase or your understanding phase. When you get to data, as in the second part, so you're talking about data, that's the bit where I wonder how people start. So when you were talking about you wanted to map these things out, when you were talking about people and skills and what's happening for them right now, that's the bit where I think people struggle. So having that goal is usually, they're like, someone's told me that 80% of people don't do this, and we need it to be 90%. And that feels like a data point for them. And they've got that kind of like end state goal, which is pretty handy. But when we say to them, well, how are you going to do that? And how do you know what's happening for these people day to day? That's the bit where I think it's okay to come into the data phase without any data, because this is where you're going to go and get it. So how do you even know where to begin to say, let's find out, to your point, you were saying, let's find out what's happening for these people. How do you know where to begin? Because it could be loads of people.
Go there. I think it's as simple as that. And that's actually going back to my performance consultant days. We used to spend time with the people that were doing the things to be done, and we were having clipboards and making notes. But I even spent time in a hospital, in an operating theater in a hospital. I watched the surgery on a diabetic toe. I would not recommend it to anyone, but I was not looking at the operation so much, but I was noticing everything that was going on around. And some things that we noticed were the trouble of communicating between the operating teams, because there's people in all different parts of the hospital that need to come together at the right time, at the right place. The patient needs to be anesthetized. There needs to be all these things happening at the right time. And actually, but you would hear, of course, all these kind of complaints, like one party would complain that the other wasn't on time, and the other would complain that the other wasn't on time. And but unless you were really there, you didn't know what was actually happening. So I think that's really the place to start, is to be there, to talk to people, to shadow them, to understand what's going on. And clearly there are tools in place that are tracking this. There's data being input. So once you understand what's going on, you also start to understand what systems they're using, how the data is logged, how good the data perhaps is, which data there is. I think just looking at the data is not always can be a bit dangerous, because you actually need to go what's going on. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think you made a really good point there about going there and observing people. So again, a common misconception I've seen from people is, well, we've got some numbers. I'm like, okay, I've got some numbers as well, but if you don't have any context for those numbers, they're kind of, you're either guessing or they're almost irrelevant. So if you can say this person was late 3 days a week, you're almost getting a bit of quantitative and qualitative data. Then if you start to find out why they're late, what's happening for them on those days, you start to build out a bigger story and a bigger picture, and that helps you with your analysis to be able to say, we're putting some meaning behind these data, meaning behind these numbers, and we can start to figure out, all the way back to your original point, what's happening for these people, what's stopping them doing this thing. And I think, again, I've seen people maybe getting too hung up on numbers or percentages or really kind of vague statements of, these people really liked it, these people didn't. And it's like, is that it? Is that the only options we're allowed? You either do or don't. Like, so I think trying to cut through that is definitely useful. I think definitely turning up and just watching people and spending time with them is definitely going to help you. When we're talking about just data and like gathering data, how do you know you've got enough? How much is too much data to get?
How do you know you have enough? So when you understand what's going on, I think that's then you know you have enough. I think and then it depends which type of data. So there's some data sources where you'll get lots and lots of data and it's cheap to capture, or it's already being captured, and then it's okay that it's a huge amount. You need to understand what it means and what it can tell you and how you can interrogate it. But there's other sources of data, so qualitative data, for example, interviews that you're running, or a day spent shadowing. Those are super expensive, right? They're taking up a lot of your time. So doing 10 days of that is too much, probably, for your project. Well, it depends on the size of the project. Again, maybe it's a 3-year-long program, and so maybe 10 days is actually the perfect amount. So it's looking at the balance in total investment. So looking at what is your total budget, days, also money, resources that you have, and deciding this is how much I want to spend on it, and to understand, and how well do you understand it already. If you worked in that environment, you probably already understand it quite well. So perhaps you don't need as much data, or you don't need as many interviews. But you need you want to be able to have enough that you can understand what's going on, and I think also important to concisely share what's going on and have the data to back that up. So I think a combination of quant and qual is always good for that, and enough that you feel comfortable to say, okay, this is a situation and this is why I think that. And then it goes a bit into your gut instinct of what is enough data. Like when you feel do you feel comfortable presenting to your CEO why they should invest in this? If you feel comfortable with that amount of data, that amount of insights, then it's enough. And maybe you'll learn that was not enough, because maybe you end up presenting and then he's like, oh, that's I don't feel like that's strong enough. But but then that's how you'll learn. So I do think you can start building up that gut instinct about what is enough for you to make a decision on that, and for others to make a decision on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a point in there about how do you know you've got enough is, so we run a hypothesis section within our data right at the end, actually. So once we've gathered what we what we know already. So like we're just kind of just collecting more to validate that. We'll make a little plan around what don't we know the answers to yet. So where are they? Why are they there? What's happening for them? How do they feel? How do they think? We'll go and grab that, do a bit of analysis. We'll talk about analysis in a moment, and then we'll do like a hypothesis. Say we thought this. So now that we've got all of the data, before we go and present to our fictitious CEO for lots of money, does our hypothesis stand up? And it seems to be a bit of a, I was going to say 50-50, that's probably wrong. It's kind of, more often than not, you're kind of on the right track if you've been following the data, but then there are things where you kind of go, unless we had this bit of data, this has blown the whole picture wide open and we didn't know anything before. So you have to almost like kind of retract your original thinking. But I do like that kind of gut reaction of, would I present this to somebody who's quite senior to say can have some investment to move this on? Mm-hmm. How confident are you in what you've done? But then I guess for me it goes back to, is I've got enough, is everyone's gut feeling the same basically? So how do you almost use data to cut through emotion? Mm-hmm. If that's
because then it's otherwise question. It's back to gut feeling again, right? And then you're like, what? But maybe, I mean, if you have a team working together, then that's even more valuable because one person will gut feeling will require more data, another less. And perhaps by having that discussion, that's a really healthy discussion to have with each other to say, do we have enough? Are we confident? Are we not yet confident? I think maybe it's the best if you can have a team together or use your stakeholders to touch base with on whether that is enough data. Yeah,
100%. And I think there's definitely a point around trying to go to not disparate groups, but like different enough groups. They don't have to be like kind of polar opposites, but being able to say this is what we found out based on data, and you're almost removing everyone's opinion. So when I've done some projects before, there's been points where probably slightly further on where I've got to MVP, where the data has told me it's this direction, made an MVP, taken it to markets. They've stripped it apart and said, this is terrible, why are you doing this? Which has given me some more data to say, don't do this, do something different. But then I usually find that kind of end part of the data process helps to kind of put everyone's opinion and biases to one side. To be able to say, it doesn't matter what you think, what I think, what they think. The data's told us this. Do we proceed or do we not? Or do we change our direction? And are you basing it on data or gut feeling or a little bit of both, or because that person's really senior and that's what they've told us to do? So it's trying to figure out where you... So in my mind, you would always follow the data. But I can see where some people maybe get sidetracked with, oh, I just got this feeling it could be something else.
Interesting. So I think that feeling is important because often it's based on experience as well, especially for when you have got senior stakeholders that will not have time to look in detail at data or will not do interviews, but they have a lot of experience, so they have a feeling. So I think getting them involved early, I think that's one thing, understanding what is their gut feeling, what is their pet idea that they would love to try, and making sure that you touch on that in your interviews with your data, because bringing them along, even if it's disproving their gut feeling, then that's a change process that you will need to manage with them. Hopefully they're open for that. They may not be, but it's a kind of, I think, there are ways to influence them, let's say, into the direction that the project is going, and you will need to spend time on that. But if it's actually confirming something that they've known or felt or for a long time or had in the back of their mind, then that's amazing, because that's a great way to bring them on board. But it's about bringing their hypothesis in early and validating it with or invalidating it with data. And perhaps one other thing I wanted to say about how much is too much, how much is enough for interviews. I remember when we were doing lots of interviews, when you start hearing the same things coming up again and again, and you've kind of managed to categorize different personas, and then the moment you start speaking with someone in the first few sentences, you're like, oh yeah, that's this persona, and I've heard that before. I think that's also where you're getting a good idea, understanding of what's happening at the moment, and you're probably starting to have enough data from that source.
Yeah, I think 100%. And I think that leads into like analysis. So when you're doing like, as you were talking about at the moment, like almost doing like an affinity map where you're starting to group certain bits of information, whether it's personas or information, or even starting to look for themes and patterns, that kind of stuff. If your kind of affinity map or similar version of that is really sparse, or everything's still just kind of scattered all over the wall and nothing's in groups, it probably means you either haven't got enough, or you've been asking the wrong questions, or you've been looking in the wrong places. I think if you can turn up with a group of people, and we always try and do it in silence for the first round of it, is usually all the information goes on the wall and then there's no talking, because you don't want somebody to say, oh, I'm going to do this. And you're like, well, why are you going to do that? Like, no kind of encouragement, just to see what people naturally do. And then if you can't get to that in a group of 3-4 people in 10 minutes, if you can't start to see patterns emerging already, where you either have a little bit of healthy debate, but largely saying this obviously goes over there, then I would then suggest you need to go and get some different or more data. But I think to your point, if you're already spotting themes like super, super quick, then yeah, that probably means you've got enough to start to make a decision on what to do.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I spoke to some people about, especially when we're talking about doing data analysis or data capture, or actually anything in the data process, is people that I've seen that say, we've asked some people. You go, great. How many people have you asked? And they say 5. I've asked about 5 people. You go, okay, I'm sure this program's for about 10,000 people, or even 100 people. 5 doesn't feel that many. What kind of advice would you give to somebody that maybe struggles with the data phase as a whole, even if they don't know they're struggling? And just to clarify, if you are that person that asks 5 people for a 100-person project, you're this person, and you should listen to Bo's advice.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good start. I think, let's acknowledge that I think it is a good start to have talked to people and ask them their opinion. I think how to get started, I think there's, I think asking yourself the question, would I feel comfortable presenting to my CEO that this is a data-driven approach? I think that's a good question to ask yourself. If the answer is no, or I never asked myself that question, I don't really know. Well, I think one valid way is to ask for help. I think there are probably teams in your organization, or there are communities of L&D, more and more of these communities that actually have a lot of experience in this. So asking for help and getting help from a peer in another organization. I think often L&Ders are working alone in their organization, or only in small groups. So I think asking for help and getting some examples of what others have done can be a good approach. And I do think start small. I think there are a few different concepts here. So get curious. That's one that I often use. So it's more like a mindset. So ask yourself questions like, okay, so these 5 people think this. I wonder if the other 95 think something similar. How might I start by asking questions? How might I find out more? And I need to present by the end of next week. There are probably limitations to what you can do. And I have in total 4 hours to work on this. So that's quite constrained. But what might I be able to do in that time to find out if those 95 are thinking the same thing? So then you might start thinking, and then get your creativity flowing, I think, because you could send a poll out in the company internet, or on Slack, or you could message another 20 people and not have to speak to them, but you message them with a poll or a quick question. There might be a gathering that's happening on Tuesday that you think, hey, there I can talk to a lot of people at the same time if you do like that personal contact. But I think there are millions of options here. But perhaps by starting small, by asking questions, and by also knowing your constraints, you could actually do a lot.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the worst thing you can do is skipping the whole data phase just because you're either scared about it or nervous about it, or if you've had like kind of not great results before because it's not something you're used to doing or particularly enjoy doing or particularly good at doing. Yeah, everyone's got to start at some point. I think that's incredible advice. Is just do something and ask someone, and that's capturing data. I think the one thing I would add to that is try and have a plan, but don't feel restricted by your plan. So like trying to think about what kind of things do you want to know, but especially if you're talking to somebody and they go off on a tangent or they start talking about something else that for them is related but it's not on your list. Don't stop them and say, no, we're talking about these two things only. Let them talk, take some notes. If they start talking about football or something, then, maybe bring them back on track if that's not what you're there to talk about. But otherwise, I think, just getting out there and trying to get used to building that skill of gathering information, because it feels like quant information is probably easier to gather. You can largely do that with surveys and reports and spreadsheets and all those kind of things. But I think qualitative is almost an art form in itself, to be able to say, I'm going to speak to lots of people or they're going to tell me lots of things. How do I make sense of 300 conversations, 300 statements, or however many it's going to be? I think that's, and I would love to meet someone that says they're perfect at it, because I don't think that person exists, but I would love to, someone that's really into that. Because it's time consuming, but it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's very, very true. And I think there are also real experts out there. So that would be good to get their view indeed. I think for me, what works really well is writing a lot of notes just after a conversation like that. So even if it's a short conversation, immediately jotting down what resonated for me or what I remembered from that conversation. Perhaps even emailing it to them and asking them if that's correct or if they have anything to add. The picture will start building up, but it is also an art form and I like a science actually to do this properly and to get the themes out of it. Yeah. ChatGPT can help us a lot actually with that as well. So if we record a conversation, we could use generative AI to transcribe it and to analyze it.
Absolutely, and I think definitely it's probably a whole other episode. But there's a definite, you can just Google like open and close questioning. I'm sure people know what that is, but when you're getting into those conversations, knowing when to use those open and close questions, almost having like a question funnel where you kind of start super open and start to bring it down. That's, for me personally, I always find that's much more in the planning than the execution. As in, if someone gives me a really good answer at the top, we could just stay open for like 40 minutes. We're going, oh yeah, great, and tell me more about that. And that sounds really interesting. And I've got absolutely no credible information from them, but we've had a really nice time. So I think being able to plan ahead for those kind of things. But you're right, generative AI, Copilot, Teams, all the things that can basically transcribe your conversation. You can start to search for things like keywords, phrases, that kind of things, and then you get back to that pattern finding and grouping of information.
Yeah,
definitely.
It speeds up the analysis, so you can, when you've gotten curious, you've got all these questions in your mind, you've got all these interviews you've done, you can actually just ask ChatGPT for the questions you've got, and it'll start spitting out answers. And
we're living in the future. I feel like Terminator is going to be real soon, so I'm going to keep an eye out. So when we talk about the data phase, and this is very specific to your career rather than what you see others doing. What mistakes have you made in the past, knowingly or unknowingly?
Yeah.
What have you learned
So I
from?
think, yeah, at the start, I mean, with my kind of technical background, I think my first, so it was about 5 years ago that I dived into L&D. And I came in a bit with the mentality of this can't be so different than, the work that I've done previously, working in factories, working in hospitals. Let's see why this is such a tough nut to crack. And I actually went into it wanting to be too rigorous and wanting to get it completely right first time. So, and then I had to pull myself back and say, okay, I actually don't understand enough of what learning is. So I actually enrolled myself on a course of learning about learning on
Wow.
Coursera, which is for free. Actually, it's fantastic how the brain works and how it's the basics on how we learn. And how it causes behavior change. And there is so much more. So I've dug a little bit deeper into that, but it's a science in itself, behavior science. So I gathered a lot of respect for those topics, and that they are, that they are actually their own domains. And there's actually a lot that we don't know yet as well. There's a lot, but there's also a lot that we do know, and that we should be mindful of that. And that from there realized, okay, it's not an exact science. And how do we go from, I guess, diving into all those scientific theories into, okay, we've got now a company that wants to drive behavior change, but obviously we're never going to get to experiment as if it's a scientific experiment. It's not an exact science. We have a limited budget. So what are the absolute most important things that we need to take from all that scientific research into a company setting? And again, there are experts on this in this field. There are people like Ina Weinbauer-Heidel, who has done the research, looked into what are the blockers to behavior change, and how can you overcome those. So it took me a little while to locate all of this and to understand, okay, it's that complicated, but it has also been simplified by people already. And these are the resources that I can now use to simplify this complicated science. And to be honest, it also puts people off if it is too big. If you make it a big scientific experiment or a big it has to be completely proven, or it's like that can really put people off and say, okay, I'm not even going to get started then. So that was, again, another mistake that I made, making it too big, and then that it wasn't picked up because it was just seen as too big and not chunked down into smaller steps, or not even chunked down to the right size for that version, that loop of the product that we were building.
And I think that's an incredible point. So I think it's worth people doing that and making those mistakes, because everyone's version of big could be different in terms of how big their project is or how big it is for them. So, like, if someone's earlier on in their career, it could be someone a bit later in their career could say, well, that's a week for me, where someone else could be a month. But also to the scale of your data collection, this is something, again, we talk to clients about, which is we need to get in and get this as quickly as possible so we capture what's happening right now, because that we want to capture this moment in time. And that moment in time could be a week's period or a month period, but no really longer than that, so we can move on, because we still got the rest of the process that we still haven't decided what we're going to make and how we're going to make it. If we spend too long doing this and arguing amongst ourselves and just collecting lots and lots of things, time is moving on. People are moving on. Things are changing, especially now they're changing really, really quickly. So your data can go out of date really quickly if you don't act on it. So I've heard people say, oh, we got this leadership program created really quickly. It took us 6 months or 12 months. I'm like, wow. So what you gathered 4 months ago, 5 months ago to get this ready, they're probably different people now. They've probably got different problems now. Or the things that you're trying to solve for, they may have solved themselves in a roundabout way, and that's not their concern anymore. So I think trying to move quickly, and like you were saying, trying to chunk things down is a huge thing for people. But I think people need to realize or self-realize, self-actualization is the word, maybe something like that, around where's my limits and how quickly can I move through this. I think that's incredible advice for people.
Yeah. And then the other one that I would say is asking why. I think we often, or I did definitely often, got very strong opinions and sort of taking them as taking them for granted, taking them as the truth, but not asking why enough. Why? That is also one that I've learned the hard way. Because once you then get into it and you start collecting the data, that might not be, if you don't know why, you then have to go back. It actually saves you a lot of time to ask
100%.
why and understand fully in the first place with your 100%. Stakeholders, with your project team. Yeah.
I've seen this actually, like in a commercial thing, like on Amazon. Like on some products, there'll be like, you go down to the review section, and there might be like 20 reviews, and 19 of them are 4 or 5 stars, and there's one person that's got 1 star. You're like, oh, I want to read this. What happened to this person? And then it's all. I see this so many times now, which blows my mind that people still do it. They put 1 star. They go, really love this product. You're like, you gave it 1 star, so clearly you didn't. They go, but my delivery driver was really rude to me. And it's like, okay, is that?
Yes.
So like, if you were just taking it on face value, I don't like this from their 1-star review, but then you read it and go, yeah, it's great, loved it.
Yeah.
But just don't use this delivery company. Like, if you hadn't asked why, if you hadn't gone to look into the review, you wouldn't realise. But I think that's definitely trying to get people to also quantify their or justify their answers as well by asking them why. Yeah. Someone says, I really love this, or I really don't like this.
Those what you said, I've asked 5 people. And then that's also, that is also data, but then okay, that's what it's based on, as opposed to someone confidently saying it and it being based on 5 people out of 100. You need to know why, basically.
Yeah.
It's really important.
100%. And just before we go, so what tools or activities would you suggest that we can all try and adopt? What kind of, is it a thing you do? Is it a tool you use? Is it a mindset? You talked about being curious. What other kind of things could we all adopt to be either more comfortable or just genuinely better at this phase, rather than just talking about it? Because we all do that a lot.
So it definitely starts with the mindset, being curious, wondering why, exploring. There's often also not one right way to gather data. There are often different ways, and I think being curious will allow you to, or the mindset that can allow you to experiment and to find your way of doing things. So exploring. And then some activities, which I definitely recommend or think are very healthy for the data phase, are, first of all, coffees with stakeholders, just understanding your stakeholders really well. Knowing what's going on with them, knowing why, back to the why, but knowing why they're making their decisions, what their point of view is, where they're hoping to go. And I say coffees with stakeholders because it's not just one meeting. If you have one meeting with them, you'll have them on a certain day with a certain opinion. You'll understand that, but you won't have built a relationship with them yet. So I think it's about keeping in touch with them, understanding who they are, why they think what they think. And then something else that I've always find useful is, once you're kind of getting that data in and having a look at it, analyzing it, summarizing it in like one slide. So I talked about that one slide at the start. get it back in there, summarize your insights. Sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming when you're getting a lot of data in, and just taking a step back and just thinking, okay, what have I found out? I liked what you mentioned with the stickies on the walls. Like,
Yeah.
just put all the data there, all your insights there, and just go through it, structure it, get it in a format where it starts to make sense to you. Yeah. And is it on the business goal level? Is it on the behavior level of the individuals, or is it on the program level? I think start to what is it telling you about your program or about your goal that you're trying to achieve? I think that's healthy as well. And it's okay, I think, to get a bit lost in it at some point when you're gathering data, or when you're finding out new things and hearing things from, getting some insights from one data set, once from the other. But I think that those moments of reflection together with your team or together with your stakeholders bring a sense making almost together. So have moments of that, because I think if you start to feel lost, you might lose a bit of steam, you might lose a bit of confidence. There's a risk that at that point you say, okay, whatever, this didn't work, and just move on. But actually, I think those are the moments where the things that you have found are very important. They might not be what you thought you would find, and making sense of it together with the team, I think, is really important. So, and also just sharing, like, this is tough, guys. Like, this is not easy. That's
No, I agree. I think if anyone says this is super easy every time, then they're a big fat liar. So I think being really, really honest with each other in your group, and especially if you're working on your own, trying to have a plan. But again, like we were saying before, not kind of being too rigid to the plan. So you talked about gut feeling and kind of trying to almost test yourself, like, would you share this with anyone? And I think it's okay to share it informally as you're going along, to say, I'm going in this direction, does it feel right? Kind of get a sense check, kind of get other people's gut feeling. But yeah, it sounds a bit vague, but I know what you mean. Some of it, the gut feeling thing, is definitely there, but I think it's also trying to go back to, do I feel like I've got enough to make an informed decision? Because this is going to affect people that are going to work on the project, it's going to affect people that are going to get the end product. How confident you feel in your approach because of the data you've gathered and analysed. But yeah, it's a minefield, but it's but I think, like you said, the most important thing I think you've said so far is you've just got to start speaking to people. You've just got to start. So I think that's my takeaway.
Yeah, definitely. Got to go understand, go get in there, roll up your sleeves and just get involved.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much, Bo. I've really enjoyed our chat about data. We usually ask people at this point, is there anything you want to plug, or anything you want to give a shout out to, or anything you want to say before you go? Where can people find you? Do you want people to find you?
Absolutely. I love, I'm myself definitely a bit of a impact measurement nerd. So I loved having those kind of conversations. So probably LinkedIn is the easiest way. So Bo Dury on LinkedIn. Maybe there is one other researcher that I'd like to mention, because this is Professor Robert Brinkerhoff. When I read his book on improving performance through learning, and he's also written some articles and some other books, the case study method. So if you're working in organizational L&D, I think those are really, really good books to read. For me, it really opened my eyes in how to structure thinking about impact, and how then to do all the data stuff after it. But really that where do you start from? He's got that super clear, and how do you drive impactful learning? He even gives examples. So I think, a lot of my own methodologies within Lepaya are based on that, on his research. Apart from that, I think I just love to have these kind of conversations with people. And definitely, if you're feeling lost, I'd love to help out. So get in touch. I can definitely give some pointers, and happy to do so.
Cool. Nice one. Well, thank you, Bo. Everyone knows where to go and get you now. I'm sure you're going to have a massively full LinkedIn inbox. So we're gonna close and then let you trawl through all those messages you're going to get. But thank you so much for your time, and it looks like it's super sunny there as well. So have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Greg.
Thanks, Bo.
You too. See you soon.
Bye.